right, ladies and gentlemen, today we are joined by a very special guest. We are joined by the mayor of Crush City, our buddy, Mr. Jacob Wheeler. Jacob, thanks so much for coming back on Tackle Talk.
Man, I always enjoy it, man. I appreciate you having me on.
So this one's exciting because today, obviously, we've had you on before, but we actually get to talk nitty-gritty tackle stuff today, and specifically your own tackle you just came out with Rapala with the CrushCity Customs lineup. So I know we've previewed it, like we got to talk to you for a minute at ICAST, but I'll tell you, man, I don't know how you function at ICAST because I watched them run you boy ragged over here for probably 30 minutes. You probably did 10 media hits in 30 minutes, and I know it's 3 days of that. So today, I think we'd really like to sit down and kind of break down these 5 baits individually and do a little bit more of a deep dive on them if you're cool with that.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely, man. It's definitely been it was a challenge. It was a lot of fun, and it was like I learned things that I never thought. Like I've always thought baits did a certain thing, and there were certain baits that I liked, and I'm like, why is that catch fish? And then I'm like, now with like a test tank and a pool and all these things, like there's so many things that we just don't realize as fishermen.
Yeah. And the amount of work I'm sure that goes into like not just one bait. I mean, you came out with a line, you came out with 5 baits. So each of these kind of, I'm assuming, has its own nuances of perfecting it and getting it right, where, I mean, you're dealing with multiple types of plastic, multiple types of, you got swim baits, you got craws, you got Neds. So I guess as far as like the Rapala Crush City lineup, like as a whole, how does this thing start out? Like, is this Rapala coming to you and saying, hey, I know we're obviously in like the hard bait category for the most part, but we're dipping our toes in soft plastics and, we'd obviously love your input on these? Or is it the flip side of you go to Rapala and say, hey, I got some ideas, I'd kind of like help bringing them to life? Like, how did this whole thing start?
So like, sort of backstory on Rapala and myself, like Rapala, like I probably wouldn't be fishing professionally without Rapala. Like, I started, they gave me a big shot, and after I won the All-American, they said, hey, look, we want you to bring you on the staff, and they were one of my first paying sponsors. There were a handful of paying sponsors, going into the next year, the FLW Tour. So natural progression. Later on, they were like, hey, look, things have been really, really good. Fishing's been unbelievable, and competing and winning a lot of tournaments and having really high finishes, and I've really close to that whole crew there. They're like family to me. And so one of the guys, came to me and said, look, man, I know, at that point in time I was with Guggen Baits, and it was sort of like the end of the contract year. And they're like, look, we are going to make these new soft plastics, but we want you to make them. And like, you'll have 2 years to develop what you want. We just want you to develop the best 5. The first 5 baits need to be 5 soft plastics that you need to win tournaments. Okay. And so this is going to be a lot of fun. We're all friends here. I mean, it was just sort of like a match made in heaven. It was a perfect scenario. Like, here you go. And so that was a lot. Like when you just have like a blank slate, it was a tough decision, but like obviously with the partnership I've had with them for so long, to be able to work with some of those people that I've been, working with for almost a decade, for over a decade now, it was a pretty simple decision. Like, hey, look, we get to go after it and get to try to play around and have some really cool stuff and bring some stuff out to the market. So the goal was like first and foremost, 5 shapes that you can do, that you can make, that we use to win tournaments on. The second thing the biggest thing for me is like, I couldn't do another bait that was like another Me Too. There has to be something that was like better. And so it's like hard in certain shapes to like do something like always, but like my goal, like, you're not always going to make the sweet beaver. You're not going to always make the structure bug or baits like that. It's not always going to happen. But my goal is to make something at least 20 or 30% better than what the competition is out there, to ultimately make it more efficient, which helps me win more tournaments. And that was sort of like the start of it all. And so that's when I came up with 5 shapes, and it was like a swim bait, a Ned style bait, because I'm a big fan of like throwing a Ned on a drop shot and throwing it on a Ned. There's also like of course like a freeloader, which was more so like mindset was vibrating jig, and then in addition to that was like shake and bake or BOA rig or like a Demiki style, a little bit bigger profile that was sort of fit both sides. Obviously a creature style bait and then a crawl. So that was sort of like the rundown, like mom on, like that's what I need. A swim jig trailer, back of a jig trailer, just flipping by itself, punching. Like I'm thinking through, like if I had 5 shapes, how can I make that work? And those were like the first 5 we rolled with.
So it's interesting you bring up, because this is the thing that absolutely drives me up a wall about the fishing industry in general now, is everybody in the world immediately, as soon as they see something that even remotely looks like something they've seen before, they lose their darn mind now. And it's going to be like a long 5 or 10 years if we keep this up in fishing, where every time you see something that is, looks even remotely like a shape you've seen before, then we just absolutely pull our hair out. Like we're going to have to start. We've hit a point in fishing where what's able to be done that makes sense has been tried already. Like there's only so many ways you can make a shad. There's only so many ways you can make a crawl. There's only so many ways you can make a worm. And so what we have to start doing at this point, I think, and this is like my big soapbox on this, is like start looking at it micro versus macro. Because if you're looking at this and saying, I want some earth-shattering shape I've never seen before, you're not going to get that. But you have to start zooming in. The days of, an earth-shattering bait coming out every year are over. You can make the argument the last earth-shattering bait that came out is a chatterbait 20 years ago. Like, so we're past that. So now you have to look at... Yeah, you have to look at a crawl and say, okay, where are the minute differences that make this different than the other 30 crawls on the market? And that's where I think the fun in new tackle lies now, is putting them side by side and saying, hey, and we're going to talk about a lot of this, like there are some small design choices that you made on each of these baits that are different than what's out there on the market, whether it's, the flanges, whether it's the appendages, whether it's the thickness, whether it's the body, shape when you're looking head on, or the durability. Like there's a lot of differences in these as I hold them up next to those things that people are like, that's a spunk shad. It's like, no, it's not a spunk shad. It doesn't look anything like like I got them both right here. They're very different body types. So that's the kind of thing that drives me up a wall is you could say a BMW is a copy of a Toyota Corolla because it has 4 wheels and windows and a hood and a trunk. And no, it's not. Like there's minor differences that make it worth $25,000 versus $60,000. So I think that's where the fun in this is going to be, is looking at these 5 baits and the small choices that are evident that you and Rapala made that I think do give these a spot in my tackle box that wasn't currently filled. So I guess before we dive into that though, you said 2 years? Is that what you said this process was, or did it end up being longer than that?
It was about 2 years from the start. Well, it's 2 and a. It was 2 and some change, but like it took time to figure out. And there's a couple of things that I had to learn to scrap. Like you got to also realize, like when on PD sides of things, I had to learn a lot myself. Like I tinker a lot, but making a whole lot of soft plastics like from scratch is, that's a big task.
Yeah.
And especially with a reputable name like Rapala and like how it's like an iconic brand. I didn't take that lightly, and so you're like, dang, I wanted to do this. And some things you had to realize, like you couldn't make this do this and that. Like there had to be a middle ground.
Yeah.
And so those were the things that like I had to figure out, and slowly but surely on the PD side, I understood. But we got it there.
Was this by far the most invested you've ever been in a bait? Like I know you've worked with like Accent and stuff before on some wire baits and stuff, but this has to be a whole different ball game.
Like I approved every color. I approved how much salt content went in them. I approved where the salt went. I approved where the scent went. I approved the scent from this is what we're looking at for scents. I mean, like it's just, by far blows everything else away from as far as the PD standpoint of how much time and effort. I put more time and effort into this series than I probably put into tournament bass fishing last couple of years.
I believe it.
And that says a lot. I mean, I spent a lot of time on the water, but that's just, that's how much time I put into it.
So the answer to this next question will probably determine where we start in the 5 here. Which of these took the longest to dial in?
Man, I'm trying to think here. As far as, what's so crazy about the longest one that actually took to dial in was actually the 4-inch mare.
Really?
And believe it or
The
not,
swim bait.
the swim bait was the one that I was like, nope, 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 and kept on going after it. It literally took to the last revision in December of last year before we got it right.
So I think I probably know where you were going with the mayor, because there's definitely some Midwest influence in its motion, and I think you probably know where I'm going with that. But as far as like the mayor itself, when you sat out to develop more of like a boot tail style swim bait, like what did you want out of the mayor?
So the first thing was where I got the whole mindset of the mayor was, so the Largo shad back in the day, like this is like 6 years ago, Storm came out with a bait called a Largo shad, which was made for saltwater. It was made at that point in time. And so I'm sitting here and like, to me, like I look at the swim baits like Kitech and other swim baits on the market, and everybody's just, once the Kitech Fat came out, everybody just ran to making Kitech Fat. Like it was like, what? Like it was insane. It was like a 1.5 craze, like where RC came out, then it went to KVD, then it went to like the Excalibur, and it was like, it was nuts. And so like, obviously a Kitech was still unbelievable, but I sort of was like, I saw that profile and I'm like, that is what a shad looks like. It has more depth, almost like a sassy shad, if you will. More depth to the body, more what like a 4-inch actual threadfin or gizzard shad looks like, has more depth and is more like realistic to me than any other profile. So I went to Storm and I'm like, look, this is like during Trigger X day, or like actually the 360 GT days. And so they made that little swim bait, and I'm like, look, we got to make this thing softer. We got to make this thing in some bass colors. Like I'm telling you all, this will absolutely kill it. And so I worked with them hand in hand to develop the colors within the Largo shad, which are now, the 3-inch and the 4-inch Largo shad. So I was a huge fan of that, which the 3-inch had a little bit more tighter action, and the 4-inch had a little bit more wider action, similar to like a Kitech. So but they were super durable. You caught it. I mean, you could catch on the screw lock head, you could catch like 10, 15, 20 bass on them a lot of times. So, but the only problem with the Largo is it wasn't a consistent action because of the durability. It was it wasn't always the best colors for the material we're using. It was a good entry level swim bait. So like that was really where it stemmed from, was like Largo. My mindset though for the 4-inch swim bait was I wanted that 4-inch mare. I wanted it to really become like, I personally think that, and I've seen this where fish, they react so differently to like a very wide wobbling crankbait versus that shad wrap, say a wiggle work versus a shad wrap, right? And so like when you think of like the swim bait like mindset of like where that's gone, you think of like Bass Tricks, you think of like Fat Kitech. And I think that it's consistently gone to where more subtle, more tighter wiggle. And so that was where like, all right, how can I make a good body roll, not too much, and then the tail not go, 10-2. I want it to be like as tight as I can get it, like, from 11 to 1 almost, to keep it here. Because that's what a shad does. He doesn't sit there. And so I'm thinking like, that's where I wanted it. So it's like, that's where I was like super adamant, like, hey guys, we have to get this right. Like it can't go 10-2. That's what every other swimbait does. But I want the body roll, but I want it to like kick. And so that's what it took so long to get that right. And because like you would change the tail and then you would adjust it, and then it would be like you would get the tail action, but then you wouldn't get enough body roll. But then you would like, so it was like that like it's like that small body roll, but then when that tail's doing that, like together, it's like that was it. Like it was finally right. But that was really what I wanted with a 4-inch. And that was what took me so long to finally get, because pressure is just getting more and more on a lot of our bodies of water. And I feel like that's where, fish are reacting to that action better than the other ones now, the more aggressive actions consistently every single day, no matter what the weather conditions are, than they will, So it's just sort of like that was my mindset with that one.
Yeah, and I think you can correct me if I'm wrong because you travel more than I do, but I think that's like it is a Midwest thing to think of a swim bait that's got a tight range of motion and almost the body roll is more important than the tail. Like around here, we've got a lot of small swim bait makers in like Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and that's what you see. You see this really tight kind of like boot tail, tail, and you want some, especially for like cold water. It's like you want that thing to just shimmy is really what it does. And like you said, nowadays everybody's these giant wagging tails back and forth. And it's like, that's not what we're looking for around here. And so it's cool to see that influence, something that I think as Midwesterners, we've been hip to for, usually we're like behind the times on a lot of things, I think. But I think we were a little ahead on that because like you said, the world's getting more pressured and you're now seeing, you saw it with Midwest finesse tactics like Ned's and stuff too. It's like things that were working here by necessity are now branching out into the rest of the United States because it's getting harder and harder with the more pressure. So that's what I liked about this. When I threw it the first time, I was like, this is very like Ohio, Indiana, Illinois to the bone. But you mentioned, so this is one of the few things where you have multiple sizes that you had to deal with while you're designing. And I think a lot of people probably underestimate the difficulty of replicating actions in different size soft plastics. Like it's not as easy as saying, we made the 4-inch, scale everything back 50%. Like that's not how it works.
It does not. And that's something that I had to learn. And I'm like, so the 3-inch has a little bit more of an aggressive action, but he has a little more thump, but he's not too much, but he has a different action. Yeah. So it's like, each one of them has something a little bit, he's like 1130 to a 130, you know what I'm saying? So he's like a little bit more to him, but I couldn't get him to where, and a lot of that came down to like, you think you would scale it down. A lot of that came down to like, okay, the paddle tells this, motion, water comes through. I'm not an engineer, but like working with some of the best engineers in the business and being able to talk with them, they're like, I don't think we can do that. Maybe we can do that. I don't know. So like they're trying to figure it out. But then also like, I want it to be like, my whole thing is if I tell the consumer it does something, and I tell somebody that's following me on social media and following me on YouTube or whatever, I want to be able to prove everything that I say it does with underwaters. I'm not going to say something that bait does not do.
Right.
And I made it this way for a reason. And so that was something that was really important to me. So like having consistent action was really important. And so that was like, you figuring out that trade-off once you get to the 3-inch size. How do I do that? And that was sort of the trade-off there.
So what's the deal with the like small little like fin thing off the tail? Like, is that purely aesthetic or is there a reason to that? Like, what I'm talking about, this real tiny little prick that's kind of off the tail.
So to me, that was more sort of like, I wanted to figure out a way to make it more like shad profile, like tail wise, like a little more like,
okay.
But that was as big as I could make it without messing up the action.
Yeah.
Like legitimately, I went smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until it was like a little nub. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to roll with that. Like, I just like where it's at. I don't want it to be like everything else. So I'm like, I'm trying to like, okay, like even like the hook slot with the little fin and the, like in that hook slot, like having that kind of stuff, just something a little bit more. I've realized over the last few years, I've learned more. I said this the other day. This is like facts. I've learned more in the last 5 years about fish and fish behavior with forward-facing sonar than I knew my entire career, my entire life bass fishing. So now we learn these things, and you see these little subtle things. Actually, like I was never a believer of scent, and then I've seen it to where it's mattered in scenarios now, and I've seen it to where like why it matters, and like. And so those are things like little subtle things to me, especially fishing professionally at this level. Like if I can just get 2 bites a year more than I did because they trail it all the time. You get 100 fish to trail your bait in a day. You might catch 6 of them. You know what I'm saying? Like that's just the facts behind it.
Yeah. So last question on the mare here is, I know you're not like, I think when we've talked to you before, you've said like you're not a big paddle tail on the back of like bladed jigs type guy. Like I know you're a lot more straight tail guy. So how are you oftentimes throwing the mare then? How are you rigging it up?
The only so like I throw like on a bladed, like a flashy swimmer, bladed swimbait jig head, which is like a VMC version of a flashy swimmer.
Yep.
I like that a lot. Like that's like one of my favorite ways to rig that around grass, that especially that 4 inch. I love to throw it on the swimbait, the finesse, the hybrid swimbait jig head, like that I use like with the freeloader scenario wise. I love just throwing it like a ball head. Like that to me is like day in and day out. And then like when I'm fishing for smallmouth, like I was up in like Erie this year, throwing like a 1/2 ounce moon eye or 3/8 ounce moon eye with a 3 inch, a finesse jig head, just winding it around, let it hit the bottom, wind, and then just lock up on it. So like it all just sort of depends on like the depth zone you're fishing it. Like, I mean, the great thing about the mare and any swim bait out there, for the most part, is just, it's so easy to fish. Like anybody can pick it up, you rig it up, you put it out there, cast, you let it hit the bottom, you wind, and you keep on moving, and it catches fish, and it really catches them, from walleye to bass to every different kind of game fish. It does a good job of doing that.
Good on the first one. That is the mare. Let's move to the second one here, the freeloader. I know you have a soft spot for the freeloader. Obviously, Gunnersville this year probably helps that a little bit, and a nice check there. But as far as the freeloader goes, what was the reasoning behind putting this in your lineup of a pintail plastic, but a pintail plastic that, like you said, right, when you think of like a spunk shad has that Ki-Tech body that you were talking about earlier, that rounded, ultra ribbed, all the way around type body that's not necessarily the true profile of a shad. And so you went with flat sides and a flat belly. So what, I guess, purpose do both of those serve based on how you're fishing it?
So like for me personally, of course, the number one way we were going to market at the time for the freeloader was a vibrating jig trailer. I knew I've been playing with a lot of baits, and I knew that like I've been catching them at Chickamauga, I've been catching them at a lot of different places, and things have started transitioning to this. There's a little bit of some anglers that were getting some understanding of what was going on with like more of that, whether it's a BOA rig or it's a Damiki, like there's a little bit more to it than just that. There are mid strolling. There's a lot of different terms for it. And so I secretly, not even talking with like the guys, I'm secretly putting little attributes that I want in this bait, but also being able to make it really good for a chatterbait. I'm like, I want to make it really good for this because I will win a tournament one day or have multiple high finishes on this moving forward, but I just don't want to talk about it yet. And so that was sort of one that I was able to and I did that with a couple plastics within the lineup. There's little subtle things that I may not be marketed towards certain things, but I did certain things to make them for something else too. Like to do what I wanted to do here really good, but I was able to make something that, while in the back of my mind, I want something for, and I have. So that sort of was the freeloader. So of course works great on a swim bait, on a chatterbait, spinner bait, of course, all that stuff. But the mindset with a freeloader for sure, with like that shake and bake, mid strolling technique, was I wanted those flat sides big time. That was a huge deal because as that bait rolled, I wanted there to be more flash. Okay, you have a rounded body, it just sort of like rocks around, right?
Yeah. I
wanted there to be more flash as it sort of rolled. Now, like, of course, I can and I think that's so interesting to me is so many people think that, I'm casting that bait out there and just like locking in on my 4 fish and sonar and watching every fish eat it. There's several fish I've caught doing that, but it's just literally a cadence and you figure it out. And then it just gets heavy, and you're just like, zzz. It's like swim bait. I've caught them in 2 foot of water. I've caught them in 30 foot of water. And so it's like something that I've realized is such a powerful technique. And I don't even think we've actually like cracked the surface on like how powerful that technique is. And like, there's going to be a lot of different places that goes, from shallow water applications to deep water applications all over. But that was like really a big part of it all. That was a big part of it. I was probably say 50% of it. And of course, vibrating jig trailer, like to me, I've always been a big fan of a Lake Fork Magic Shad. That's always been a great one for me. And then like sort of, of course, like and that was sort of like, having that shad profile and doing something a little bit different. Slimmer size, it gave it a little bit more of that like that action is sort of like, I'm again big on my vibrating jigs hunting. Like, like I said, I'm not a big fan of my using boot tails as much on a chatterbait. And so like, for me, that was another big reason behind that.
Yeah, I took this out today, and we were talking about before we recorded that it was kind of a miserable day out, but I was out there fishing on the river, and I had this just EWG, just weightless, and I was fishing it like a fluke.
Yep.
That's how I was out there fishing it. And it walks surprisingly well. It's got a pretty nice back and forth to it on just a weightless EWG hook. So like I said, I think the versatility of this thing is what's really cool. Is like you said, yes, obviously you look at it and you say, yep, that's a bladed jig trailer, that's something like that. But like you said, this strikes me more as a fluke than it does something like a spunk shad.
I 100% agree with that. I definitely agree with you on that. And that's something, it's profile aspect of like more of a fluke style bait. And that was sort of the mindset of like, how do I merge, like sort of in my mind, multiple different techniques into one?
Yeah.
And that's hard to do, but that was sort of the mindset with that. And like to me, like it will work as a fluke. Like I'll put like a weighted hook on it and it'll actually like shimmy down, like slow, like almost like a Cinco will. And there's just like little ways I'll, like having a smaller profile because it's like a 4 1/4 and like a fluke's 5 something or whatever. So like that's sort of like something that I always have, like, hey, if they're eating a little bit smaller bait or they're on a small like thread fin, I'll pull that out. And I've caught them definitely doing that as well. So it's just figuring out, like, I got to give everybody out there, like, hey, look, you got to take time to make, play around with your tackle, because you'll learn little things and understand like, oh, wow, like, with that freeloader, understand like a little weighted hook on there allows it to really, with that flat body, allows it to shimmy more. So then I'm able to like make those casts, a little weighted hook, it shimmies more. I get what I needed to do, and I pop, and it darts around a little bit more, and it shimmies just like a sink cast. So those are like, yeah, definitely something you can use it for.
So you mentioned with the Mayor, I think too, the big hook cavities. You've got some pretty big flaps like on the bottom of this thing. And is that something that you usually look for? Like, it's one of those things I never really put a lot of stock in because I just tuck my hook points anyway. But is that something where you'll leave that hook like completely exposed and not tucked in the actual inside of the bait and just use that hook cavity to shield it?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's definitely, like when I go to like a hook cavity aspect, I want as least amount of plastic as I possibly can have to penetrate through if I'm text rigging that bait or exposing that bait. So it's like, to me, that's really the most important thing. I've even played around with that with the freeloader with like a flashy swimmer or that, the hybrid swim bait jig head. And I've utilized that with the bladed hybrid swim bait. And that works really well as well. Like it just sort of has that vibration. It sort of like shimmies around if you want something a little bit more subtle, like little things like that. Like I wanted that hook slot in there so I could, of course, text rig it, but then also add some other like screw locks and weighted hooks and stuff like that with it as well.
So last thing on this one is the ribs itself, and I guess this is probably across the line, is one of the things you look at when you look at each one of these baits. Like you have this consistent, and they're like the same distance apart too. So you can tell, like you can look, that ribbing is kind of across the board for all 5 of these, which is weird because I love rib baits too, and a lot of my soft plastics have these deep ribs in them. Obviously, you look at Kytex and stuff like that, and it's become very popular. But what do you think it is about that texture? Because as you look like naturally around at forage, like nothing has a really rough texture to that. Like everything they're eating is smooth sided, yet we've found this success in these like ultra soft plastic rib baits. Is it just something that gives those fish, you think, something to feel in their mouth and like collapse on? Or what do you think the deal is with ribs in general?
So the real reason that I like that so much is because those ribs trap air. And then when they get to the bottom or hit the bottom, or I start like, so like for instance on a freeloader, like when I make a cast, it'll trap air in those ribs. And then when it gets down there and I start working it, like say a fish sees it and I start working, bubbles come up out of it. Or like with a Bronco Bug or with like all of those, the same scenario. It's like, or with the BLT, same scenario. It traps air and it hits the bottom. And if a fish falls out to the bottom, all those bubbles come up and it's like a natural sort of like, it's like,
I've never in a million years thought of the bubbles that they would trap. But yeah, I mean, it's a good point. You're right. If you've got something, especially that got ribs on the bottom side that it's falling, then yeah, even if it's on the way down, like it's going to have air under it that might release bubbles as you go. And you can probably, I don't know how sensitive, forward facing is, but sometimes you can see bubble trails and stuff off of baits.
Yeah, I don't know about like that. I mean, I only know it just because of like in testing, I was able to look at that. And I'm like, that we're keeping that, and then that's really cool. Let's use this a little bit more. That's why. Like as I sort of played around with it like a little bit more, that was something that I was like, yep, that just adds a little bit more. If it adds something, I'm like, yeah, we can keep that. That sounds like a good idea. I like that. It adds something a little bit more to it.
All right, next up on the list, we have the Cleanup Craw. So the Cleanup Craw it's like your standard 3.5 inch, more traditional of the two craws that you came out with, obviously. You got your flat sides, you've got your flanges on both sides of the appendage there, and then you've got these 3 small like appendages on either side as they go down. One of the design elements that strikes you on this and then on, I believe, the Bronco Bug, we'll probably get to in a second too, those 3 appendages that you have on either side of it are faced the complete opposite way that almost every other bait that you're going to see down the aisles is. Like every bait has those little arms pointed toward the back of the bait the way the water's going, and you've got these 3 little appendages that are pointed the opposite way. I think I know the reason for that, but I have to imagine that was intentional, right?
Yeah. That was definitely intentional. Like, there's obviously there's the primary action in a bait, and then there's secondary actions in a bait that again can make a difference in generating bites. And so for me, it's like those little subtle things that can really, trigger a fish. Or so like with the Cleanup Craw, it was the same. It was like that inverted legs. Like when every little movement that I pull that bait, of course, it just goes back and it just quivers. It's quivering nonstop. So like even a little current comes by, it's quivering. It's really sensitive to that. And like to my mind, like I made it big enough where that it would quiver and it would give that good secondary action, but not too big where it would negatively impact someone fishing in heavier cover. Like, so I had to think of that as well. Like I don't want to but I wanted something to add a little bit more to the bait. And I always thought, I'm like, well, it was on like, why does everybody do it this way? And as I would review and I think about stuff, and I'm like, man, like I look at them in the pool, like other baits in the pool, and I'm like, those things, they're literally do nothing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how can we just do something that's like, do this, guys, just try this. And it's like, oh, wow, that's that's really cool. And so that was really the mindset of that secondary action, every little movement, even if those craws aren't moving, like you just pop it just a tiny bit. Those little, those little appendages on the side, they're quivering a little bit. And so like whether it's a fish spawning or a fish is sitting there looking at, like, I don't know if that's real. Those are the things that I really looked at. And I'm like, that really was something that I was like, hey, that can also separate us in the craw game a little bit, because it is, everybody has a craw out there. And so that was definitely, that was something that I really wanted to, I was like, hey, we got to do this.
Yeah, I was seeing it, like I was flipping it, and you would see like they flare up as it falls down. And I think that's honestly, if I had to like gun to my head, I would say my favorite thing about that Cleanup Craw is just the straight down fall of it. You guys did a really good job with the consistent motion. I've thrown it on 3/16, I've thrown it on 3/8. It doesn't matter. You get that nice flutter. It's not obnoxious. It's not a rage craw.
Yeah.
It's somewhere in the middle, and you get that just clean back and forth, and then those 3 little appendages on the side flare up as it goes down. Because you look at something like, I don't know, like an X-Zone adrenaline crawl or something, like it's got those spines on the side too, but they're faced the opposite way and they're so small. They're just part of the profile. They don't actually add action or anything. They're just part of the overall shape of the bait. And so I think you guys, again, did a good job on thinking through these things that are usually useless and just part of what makes it look different in the package than the other 3 that are down the aisle. And you're like, no, how can we, as it hits the bottom, and they quiver as soon as it hits the bottom too. Like as it hits the bottom, your claws do a good job. The claws start to fall, and then these things just kind of like do that, and they just poke out a little bit and they flare. So I do like it. I think it's still nice, reeling it in. It's still nice hopping it and stuff, but I think I've really found that I like this crawl on like the straight down the best.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. Like that to me, like really the design on like the bottom side of it was really more so the consistent action of like that I wanted. Like I'm like, I need to, like you said, like a 3/16, like for my Ohio River guys throwing an 1/8 and a 3/16, and then the guys who are, throwing a normal 3/8, you want, it's a lot easier to make that 3/8 work with any crawl, but at 3/16, you put it out there and it still kicks consistently. But again, even sort of going with the swim bait, same sort of deal. Like I didn't want it to be too aggressive, like you sort of said. Like it needed to be like a little bit. Like if I can make it tighter, I would. And so that was sort of like the perfect. That was sort of the middle ground. There's a version of it that was even tighter than that. And I'll even go like when I like actually. So like what I did was I'll even go in like when I use it on a jig trailer and I don't want as much action. I'll cut the back half of the appendage off, like the back little flange, to where it has a little tight, has a little bit more tight. Like so, it's like it has more of like a I don't know. I wouldn't say like it's not. It's definitely like you said, not right a rage crawl. It's way under that, but it's consistent. It has a good little tight action, but it can be even tighter. And so, I cut off like the back end of that flange, and then I'll use it where I want like a faster fall,
So
like that back end.
one of those two right there. You're cutting one of those off, huh?
On each side, I'll cut that off,
right,
and then that'll have it a little bit more tight. It won't be as consistent of an action, but that will give me a different action than what's actually there. Or if I want a faster fall, like a quarter ounce weight or something like that, I sort of play around with that, especially the jig trailer. But I also wanted that crawl for a swim jig, and a swim jig needs resistance. So I needed resistance up there to where I could really pump it and like do that Alabama shake and shake it through there. I wanted a little bit more profile there as well because a lot of complaints out there. They're like, man, I only get one bite out of a bait. Not saying you won't get one bite out of a bait. It happens at times, but consistently, I don't want to make a product that it's only a one fish bait if I can help it. I mean, so that was sort of the mindset, like thickness. I wanted something that had a little bit thicker body. I could cut it down. I wanted to where I could use it in super versatile. And the craw is the key bait to be a super versatile bait. And that's why like I made it, in those scenarios.
So you tell me if you did this on purpose or not too. So I was cutting this the other day and I was putting it on a finesse jig, and where you cut, obviously like usually you cut out about half of this thing, right? And usually like secondary appendages like that go all the way up the bait. And with yours, they stop about halfway up. So if I cut this and I trim this for a finesse jig, all 6 of those secondary appendages are still on the bait.
Yeah, so that's sort of my mindset of like, I'm not going to say that was intentional necessarily. Like, I'm like, it had to be that way. It was something that as I played around with it, like, I like these appendages here. This is where I get the best action. And then I'm like, hey, look, also, guys, this is really where I'm going to cut it in half to make it for a swim jig trailer or a smaller jig trailer. This is where I'm going to, majority of the time, I'm going to cut it and I'm going to still have that secondary action.
So next we have, obviously, the Bronco Bug. And the Bronco Bug, it's a shape that I guess – if you're really dialed into like JDM stuff, people have seen that type of shape before. But as far as like mass produced on your local store shelves, like there were probably a lot of people that hadn't really seen anything quite like that, or until they saw the entire internet, light up and they'd be like, oh, I've known about this for years. No, you haven't. You weren't throwing a doe live beaver. But like that kind of stuff. So it's a really cool action on this bait, and 2 types of action. Like I like the fact that when you flip something like a Bronco Bug, you've got this, like as soon as it hits the bottom, those giant meaty inverted appendages there's like secondary and third dairy, I don't know, like motion as they hit the ground and quiver. And then also on the straight retrieve, I don't know why it does it. I don't know how it does it, but those type of appendages make this thing just like dolphin donkey kick in the water, and it's really weird. So of all of the creature baits, because you said you wanted like a creature bait in this 5 of something to round out the 5 lineup here, why did you go with the inverted type deal here versus more of like a sweet beaver or something like that, like that you see those normal shapes?
Yeah, so like for me, it really came down like you said, like as I'm looking at like creature baits, I'm like, everything sort of has been done, right? And I'm looking at things, and I'm looking at the market, and looking at where I'm at, and I'm like, I've used like a OSP beaver before. I've used that several times, and I always had issues with it. Like it was a really good bait on a free rig. It was like more of a finesse tactic bait. I've also used a Nori's bug that actually was the original with the action. They made the action of that.
Is that the Chiba something or whatever they called it?
Chiba, something.
Chiba Twin, something like that. Yeah.
That's what it is. So they were the originator of the action that I know of. There's so many different things. I even went and talked to several, friends that are, from Japan and asked them like, who was first, what was up, like what's the thoughts? Because there's always something like, even like with a cover scat, supposedly a cover scat was not first. G-Crack was actually first to the mark. So there's always some, I'm always trying to understand, so, because you obviously like to me, this is the one that I legitimately, I'm like, I look at it and I love that action. So like, of course, every time I've talked about it, I'm like, look, shout out to Norris and OSP because I thought it was a phenomenal action. I was like, look, but I couldn't do what I wanted to do with either of those baits, and so that's when I'm like, all right, if I could do something and add like more of a heavy cover bug, bigger profile, but add extra action, have that sort of that dolphin kick like those two baits have, I could do something sort of unique and it won't cost everybody $10.99. You can't get them. That's one tough thing about JDM products. You can't get them a lot of times.
Right.
And so they are tougher. They're typically more of a finesse mindset, tactic, like minded techniques or baits. They're softer. They're one fish baits at best a lot of times. And so how can I create something that's going to be more, I'm going to be more efficient with, more durable, also be able to fish in heavier cover, put a bigger hook in. All of those things were in my mindset when I did that. Like that was really the goal. And so like when I was sort of developed it, I'm like, but I also want those secondary actions. I want somebody to get more out of that bait where I could ultimately have like the raised ribs on each side. Like it's all about functionality and it was all about efficiency for me out there on the water that like when I look at the Bronco Bug, why I created it the way I did.
Yeah. And I think for, again, 95% of normal anglers out there that are listening to this right now, it is, you hit the nail on the head. It's no longer a one fish bait. I've only used a OSP Beaver one time, and you're right. Like those big, when you have that much meat on either side of that small thing that's connecting that giant claw to the giant body, like they're gonna rip and it's gonna happen. So that, and then the fact that I think they're like anywhere from 11 to 12 bucks a pack, and you only get like 5 or 6 of them in a pack, and you got to send a carrier pigeon over to Japan for it because no one over here has got them in stock for the past 2 years. So it's like bringing something like that to the masses, to the kid or the person here in Ohio that would have never in a million years had a chance at fishing a $12 for 6 pack of soft plastics that hasn't been in stock in 2 years. Like that's what I love about this kind of stuff, is bringing it. I never understand why more options is a bad thing to people. And
I understand that.
I don't get it.
I would, and I would never take the credit for the action. And that's why I always make sure to preface that, because I'm like, that was something that was originated here. And this is where I'm going to tell you where it was originated at, because I respect that. But I will never make something, again, that I feel like, again, like you're like, that I can't do something better, or I can sort of find a hole or a niche in fishing world that I feel like this is where this is going to fit and this is going to do a lot better for this. That's my goal. Because again, it's so hard. There's some things that have coming out that I definitely am excited about that are really unique. But it was just, that one right there. It's a special bait that Bronco Bug catches them, and it is something that a lot of people they don't really, they don't see it and say, okay, this bait does that. They don't understand it yet. So it'll take some time for it to catch on for sure.
Yeah, it's one of those baits when you look at it, you go, that thing's not going to have any action. Like,
you're like,
how? It's got no flanges, it's got no reason for anything to move on it, and then you put it under the water and it starts free willying, and you're like, what the heck is this thing doing? It's super cool. How did you guys tackle the issue of trying to solve the durability problem with that type of shape? Because like I said, just physics wise, when you got that much meat on either side of that small little arm, it's definitely got to be a tough issue to try and solve, to say, how do we make this more durable? It's never going to be the most durable thing in the world, just because of how it's designed.
It's not. And it's also like that bait has to have a lot of salt in it. The salt content has to be pretty heavy to make it that way. And so that to me was like, it took a while to get the right action. Also, I made it like, we have like the Bronco kick. The reason it got the name Bronco Bug was literally because it was when we had a different, I said, hey, like, can we thin up the connection a little bit, which it looks pretty thin. Like, and so can we thin that up a little bit and see what that does? When I got it back, Kyle Wood, Dan Quinn, the whole crew were all sitting there and we pitched it in a tank. And when it hit the bottom, oh, there, sorry. I'm over here. When it hit the bottom, it literally had like a Bronco kick. So it hits the bottom, and because those legs are so heavy, and then that hinge right there isn't really thick, those legs come forward because it's so weight heavy, and then they come back. So it gives that sort of defensive crawfish motion when it hits the bottom. And that was something that I'm like, all right, let me fish this for like a month and let me see how many fish rip the dang claws off. And so it was like, I mean, as far as it was a high 90% that I never had a claw come off. And I'm like, this is the version we need to roll with, because that adds this and it adds this, and we have a thicker body and we have secondary action with inverted appendages. This is the one for me.
So here's the big question then. When you have two craw type, plastics in these 5, when are you picking up a Bronco Bug versus a Cleanup Craw?
So like a Bronco Bug still is like, even though it has like that undulating action, crawfish action, it has more of a bluegill profile as well. Also, one thing that a Bronco Bug's really, really good at is because it has so much weight to it and so much plastic, it's a really good weightless bait, like that you can skip on a bait caster. Sort of like almost like a cover scat, but something different that you can skip up underneath a dock on a 7.3 medium heavy with a fast tip and having a lot of backbone on a 17-pound line and a 4/0 straight shank hook. Like that was another thing that I'm like, all right, this is gonna, completely different deal, but like you skip it there and it sort of sits like horizontally, like almost like that, like Cinco-ish deal. And then when you pull it, it flutters. So like that was definitely something that like, they're just two different profiles, and they hold, like I'm flipping a Bronco Bug by itself more. Like I would say 50-50 on the Cleanup Craw. It's sort of an addition to on some things. On half my techniques, obviously football jig trailer, regular jig. I can adjust things like a little bit accordingly to what I want it to do. Of course, a great little punch bait. It's the right profile, really good just pitching around by itself. It's not too small where you can't pitch it around by itself. Works great on a Carolina rig. Like I had multiple different things in my mindset. Like this is like your 7-foot medium heavy to Cleanup Craw is.
Yeah.
Like it's going to do it a lot. It's going to do a lot. Where the Bronco Bug, it's more so like, hey, different action, showing the fish a different action in different scenarios. And there's some other techniques within this profile that I'm adding to it, like a weightless rig, because it's so heavy that I'm able to utilize this for that separates it, and that was like, they're different. Like it still can be a bluegill imitator. It can still be a crawfish imitator, but just that profile overall, 4 inches long, a little bit bigger, wider. It just catches them. I've caught them when I know they're eating bluegills and I'm pitching like a bluegill colored Bronco Bug around and they're, gobbling it up. I've seen it happen. It's just sometimes it's just showing them something different with action can be the difference in generating the bite.
So that leads us to the final bait here. And I know of all the work that probably went into these, I know you're probably not going to hear it. This is probably my favorite one, to be honest. I just, obviously it's a necessity of where I live too, but it's definitely the one that I have fallen in love with the past, like probably 2-3 weeks more so than I probably anticipated even. And it is the Ned BLT. And so the Ned BLT, I think, might be the most different from all of them. Obviously, you're dealing with a completely different plastic here. So you've got that, TPE, that thermoplastomic elastomer or something. Yeah. Whatever TPE stands for. I'll let the chemists decide that one. But it's like, from what I know about TPE, which isn't much, I think it's got a different melting point than like our normal soft plastic. So I have to imagine, like, even in the engineering side of things, like it's got to be a different process to make this probably than the other 4 in the lineup. So first question here, why TPE? Why did you go with a different formula and a different actual type of plastic for this bait in particular and not so much the other 4?
Okay, so like this one definitely came in like thinking about like mindset wise. I love throwing, like, you think of like the original Ned, like in the Z-Man Ned, there was like, of course, like a last text, like that was something that was always great. It worked really well. I used it a lot over the years. But I wanted a profile a little bit different. Like when you think of like that traditional Ned style bait, you think of like stubby, Basinko style, like Ned Katie, like that's what his mindset was. Not much action, almost actionless. So like I sort of went a different position, still had some floating material to it, and it would float, but would float about an 1/8 ounce head, or maybe like right around that eighth. But like once it got heavier than that, so to me, like I'm like, all right, I want something that's a little bit more narrow, that has a little bit of action because it's more of a narrowed worm type of bait. I want it to be a little bit longer to where it's not just locked into maybe like, so it's 3 inches, not like 2.75, which is not a lot, but it is just a little bit more of a taper. Of course, those ridges that allow it to trap the air, and then that catches the air when it hits the bottom, that air sort of comes up. And then of course I wanted it to where it was a high floating plastic, and that plastic right there, with the amount of salt that I have in it, it will literally stand up a 1/4 ounce jig head. Like I literally did like a test on it. Like, it's like, I'm a big fan of like a TRD as well. Like, I mean, big shout out to them. And Z-Man, like I know them for a long time, but like I throw a lot of quarters. I throw like a lot of 3/16. And so for me, you never got that advantage typically with that plastic, of course, it's also super durable, but like the high floating plastic, to me, I wanted it to stand up those heavier heads because that's what I throw on tour.
Yeah.
And that's where what I did with it. Like the 3/16, it'll stand instantly. And it's awesome for like a 1/4 ounce jig. Like now a 1/4 ounce jig, I put it on the back of a 1/4 ounce jig, throw it out there, like finesse jig, cut it up real super tight, boom, straight up. Like those are the things that really were like my mindset different. But in addition to that, I'm a big fan of throwing like that bait on a drop shot. So whether I'm throwing it drop shot where I'm wacky rigging it, or throwing a crossover ring in the center of it where it'll sit, it's the only bait that I know of that will sit perfectly horizontal on the market. Texas rig, well, not the only bait. I'm sure there's several up there, but personally that I've thrown where you rig it like that, and you have it rig it wacky style, or just rig it straight through it wacky style and throw it out there, and it'll sit perfectly horizontal, it's right there in the center of the bait. So like I can literally have like a 12-inch leader or 14-inch leader, and it's just sitting right there above that, perfectly horizontal every time.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you ever drop shot this, because as the secondary thing that I thought of as soon as you see it is like, this would be a killer drop shot bait. I don't drop shot a ton, but for the people that do, it'd be great. The one thing I think I want to give like praise to this, I don't know the right word for it, but you kind of sort of hinted at it a second ago, is you harnessed that like durability and the type of plastic you want, but you increased the jiggliness of that type of plastic, because like you said, I got a TRD right here, and a TRD by design is stubby and motionless, and that's like as soon as it hits the bottom, it just kind of sits there. And then you've got this more of it's not a pintail obviously, but it comes to more of a point as it goes up, and it narrows, and it does. Like I've seen it underwater where you sit it there, and I think one of the things I look for sometimes in Neds is the ability to have that bait continue moving when I'm doing nothing to it.
Absolutely right.
That's the tough part. Like there are certain times where I want to, like on my end, dead stick that bait, but I don't want that bait to be acting like a dead stick under the water. I want it to just have just that little tiny bit of motion that fish that's nosed on it for the last 24 seconds says, all right, it's still moving. Where with a Z-Man TRD or something, once it sits there, it's just basically sitting there. Like it's not really doing a whole lot. So I really like that. I like that it's just got this momentum to it that once it starts moving, and you can, like, if you're watching this, like you can see, it's just way more jiggly than I think any other of those ultra stretchy, like you think like a Nico baits or something like that, right? Yeah. Those really durable type stretchy Neds, they're by design not having a lot of secondary motion to them.
No, and they don't. And that's what, like, that was definitely like the differentiator. It's really hard to change and separate yourself in the worm markets and like that. So like that little bit of change, and like we even talked about at ICAST, having those in a clamshell, every single bait that you have that you get out of those, each CrushCity bag, it literally is straight every time. you're paying for premium plastic, but every single bait is ready to roll. It's not kinked up. It's not, it's a legitimate. It's ready to roll. It's tournament ready. It's what I'm gonna put in my box. And I'm gonna put on my bait, and like it's ready to roll. So like that's important to me. I remember Aaron Martin's always being ate up with it. He was so meticulous, and always really looked up to A Martin, man. He's unbelievable. But he was super meticulous in every single bait that he would pull out of a package. I remember him bringing a pack of flukes and he was picking them out one by one. And he's like, man, he'd go through like 10 packs and he had like 7 flukes. And there'd be like, or 16 worms out of like 30 packs. And I'm like, why, man, it matters. It all matters. And so that always stuck with me, and so like, to take a little extra and put those in clamshells, especially you wouldn't think a worm makes that big a difference, but obviously it really does. And, I think a lot of people do that with a lot of other plastics out there with cross and everything else. But when you don't have appendages, it still really matters and still definitely impacts the overall action of the bait and the overall look of the bait.
Yeah, it's definitely the thing that grinds my gears, right? You open up, and you're in the price range with these that you're about $1, like for a crawl or something, you're about $1 a bait, which is basically normal nowadays. But the thing is, it grinds my gears when you pay $1 a bait, and like you said, 3 of the 7 in there come with crimped claws, and I get it all the time because I buy cheap baits a lot of times. You're like, I can't use half of these. Like even if I wanted to overlook the small issues, like there's still half these in the bag that have been sitting with their claws like this for 3 months, and no matter what you do, boil them, whatever, it's not going to matter. They're not coming back to life.
I know, it's so frustrating. I'm like, gosh dang. I mean, it's something that you have to you appreciate it. But I mean, I was the same way. Like I remember I still have packages of baits that I used to have back when I was like in high school, and I'm like, gosh, and I opened them up the other day and I'm like, all right, it's time to get rid of these.
Yeah. So on the Ned BLT itself, can you explain to me again, is it just something that looks cool, or was there any rhyme or reason? Because I'm a dork and I ask questions like this, but that little almost like turtle shell type deal. That's right up at the top there. What was the reason behind that in the design process, like in the mold, versus just saying, no, I'm just doing a ribbed worm all the way down?
So the only reason I did that, working with engineers, I wanted it to dart around a little bit more. And so I didn't want it to completely have resistance,
Okay.
So I wanted, so like it basically has like the top of the worm sort of like comes up and it sort of has a raised portion there that it sort of goes down the sides. And so that sort of gave it a little bit more when I rigged that hook, that's the top of the worm. When I rig it there, it sort of glides more because of that, but still has the ribs to allow it to sort of, with the bubbles. So that was sort of my mindset with that. It's so funny because Welcher, when we were talking about, like, I talked to Welcher a lot, and he's like, it's a turtleback worm. That's what you need to call it, a turtleback worm. And so it's like, it's just funny. It's like that turtleback worm catches. I'm like, shut up, Welcher. You know what it is.
The turtleback worm. But yeah, worm. I love that you mentioned like the gliding of it, because when we had Ned on, obviously, and talking to Ned about like the olden days when they were first starting to do this, and Ned's like, I didn't, and all the people, and Ned will tell you he's not the guy that invented the Ned rig. He just kind of like wrote about it, and obviously that's where people picked it up. But there's like 7 different cadences or whatever that he fishes a Ned. Like, and one of them is like the swim and glide or whatever, like that type of deal, where he's fishing him in the middle of the water column on like the lightest jig head he can find. And he's like, it's not always meant to just go all the way down to the bottom real fast and stand straight up. Like, it's what it does in the meantime that's a big deal with the Ned rig. And I think we've lost that a lot of times now. It's just people putting a jig head on to get it straight down to the bottom, and they're just bulldozing the bottom with a rock or whatever.
That BLT is a bait. That was one of the baits that I made that has multiple different things that I have in my back pocket that are really, 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 really good. And it does some things differently than any other baits in the market because of that. It obviously does it just really well on a Ned, but it does it great on a drop shot. But there's other things that I made it for that I was like,
where's the BLT name come from?
That was just more so Dan Quinn. He loves a BLT. He loves a bacon, lettuce, tomato sandwich. And I was just so funny. We were laughing. I'm like, we'll just call it the Ned BLT. Ned BLT. And he's like, Yeah, I love it. We were just laughing about it. So it was just sort of more so like an inside joke within the crew.
That's funny.
And everybody, you like BLTs, Kyle? Yeah, I do. I love BLT. Back, like, let's just call it the BLT. And, it's just funny. So
That's hilarious.
that was the fun reason. I wish I could tell you it was, man, there was the scientific reason of why we call it the BLT, but no.
Yeah, I was picturing like you some cheeky little like bass love texture or something like
exactly.
nah, just some guy on the design process really loves BLTs.
Like legitimately. It was pretty funny.
That's funny. Well, I got one last question for you here, and it's actually from a listener. So I posed out to a couple listeners before we started recording here if they wanted to ask you a question. This was the best one that came in. So this is the mailbag question powered by Dakota Lithium, and it is from Tyler. And he says, I know we might not get a straight answer, but can you ask Jacob Wheeler if there are any plans to continue this line and expand down the road, or are they happily sticking with 5?
Oh, yeah. I've been working diligently with the next run of Crush City Baits. I'm excited. I'm excited to there's some things that definitely, again, there's some things that are, 20-30% increase and really nice, but there's also some things I'm looking forward to showing why and what it does and what it does differently. So yeah, there's some more coming. Yeah. Every year right now, like we're working on 2025 right now. So we already have 24 done. And then I'm finalizing colors right now. So I'm finalizing the color line, which is interesting, which is a lot of fun too. But little things of flake. Somebody was like, I commented on my post and on the Bronco Bug, and he's like, I wish you wouldn't make your green pumpkin so dark. And I'm like, I'm sorry. I like a dark green pumpkin.
Same. I want like black in my green pumpkin.
Like I want it darker green pumpkin than light. I don't want it watermelon. Like that's not. I want a green pumpkin. Like I lived in the Midwest. So like water's not that clean. Like it seems like all the people that love that natural watermelon-y like green pumpkin are all like a lot of West Coast guys, a lot of Clearwater guys, like a clean green pumpkin. But no, you actually like watermelon.
Yeah, that's what watermelon is for. Don't watermelon my green pumpkin just because.
That's exactly what I was saying. I'm like, get out of here.
Yeah. Yeah, some of these people just need to fish some real dirty, knee-deep sewage creeks and, they'll learn. Like, you need the dark GP.
You don't have to throw black and blue if you have a dark green pumpkin. I'm just telling you. It's natural. It catches them. It's the natural color of the crawfish. It's good.
Yeah, that's what I've always said. Crawfish don't turn black and blue when the water gets dirty. Like they still find natural colored crawfish to eat.
It is weird. It is weird though. In like Louisiana, they have like black and red crawfish. Yeah. Quite a few. Like it is weird. Like they catch a lot. Like so, there is some. Like I'm not like a huge fan of like black neon, but there's buddies of mine that swear up and down that it's love. That's all they feel. Like black neon, black neon. I'm like, why? Oh well, dude, our crawfish are this, and that's why I like. I'm like. Huh. Okay. I can roll with that.
Yeah. Well, hey, I appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much. And I'm not blowing smoke. I think I told you before we started recording, I like these soft plastics. Like they have made their way into my day bag that I'm taking with me to the rivers, to the lakes. And it's not just to try out anymore. Like I'm past that phase in it. Now it's like, no, these are starting to replace 2 or 3 things in my bag. And I think it's awesome. I mean, you guys did a great job. It was thoughtful. I love the protection of the integrity of the baits. I like the fact that you took ideas that are out there and genuinely improved on them, or taking something like the Freeloader and marrying a fluke and a spunk shad. I like that you took something like an inverted craw and tried to fix the glaring issues that are out there with the 2 inverted craws that I think people might be lucky to get their hands on if they get their hands on them. So that kind of stuff. You guys did a really good job with these. And again, I think it's something that actually has staying power. And in a world where it seems like everybody's just making something for the headline for this year at ICAST and then they move on and those things aren't staples 3, 4, 5 years down the road, I think these really are the real deal. So kudos to you guys in Rapala.
Thank you so much, man. I appreciate you trying them out, man. It's really cool, man. I know it's been cool to sort of see through people and people, comments and DMs and people talking about like, hey man, I just won my tournament last week on this, and talking to some of some of the smaller retailers that of course people at Academy as well, and just sort of hearing this, some of that hey man, people are excited about this and trying them out, and success stories are really what it's all about to me. Like knowing that people are going out there and catching fish and doing that. That's I would never have thought that in a million years, being a kid from Indiana, that this day would come. So it's really it's definitely, it's surreal. You sort of just sit back and you're like, I just sat here and worked with the best lure company in the world. I feel like, of course, so it's very humbling. So thank you for the kind words, man.
Yeah, congrats on the launch. It's exciting to see them getting in people's hands, and we're excited to see hopefully the population of Crush City continue to grow here in the next couple of years.
I got a couple good ones for you guys next year.
Awesome. Appreciate it, man. Thank you so much.
I really appreciate it. See you, man.